Richmond, Virginia, 1800. In a cramped blacksmith shop, Gabriel Prosser hid blades in the glowing coals. His plan, to lead thousands of enslaved men into Richmond, strike down their masters, and seize the capital. But a storm and betrayal would shatter the uprising. Gabriel was born in 1776, the same year the United States declared its independence. But for him, there was no freedom. He was born into bondage on a tobacco plantation just outside Richmond, Virginia. While white Americans celebrated liberty, Gabriel grew up knowing only chains. From an early age, he stood out, tall, broad-shouldered, and strong. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that unnerved his masters. They could control his body, but his mind was harder to shackle. When he was still a teenager, his owners recognized his talent with iron. They sent him to the forge, a place where sparks danced and hammers sang. The blacksmith shop became both his prison and his sanctuary. By day, he repaired farm tools, shaped horseshoes, and crafted the metalwork that kept the plantation running. By night, when the overseers were gone, he stayed with the anvil, letting the rhythm of the hammer echo his unspoken thoughts. Every strike was a reminder he was mastering a skill that could be turned to more than labor. Iron was power. A plow could be reforged into a blade. A horseshoe could become a weapon. With each glowing bar of steel he shaped, Gabriel carried a dream in silence, a dream of freedom. Unlike many, he could read. He absorbed sermons, political speeches, and scraps of revolutionary rhetoric. The words of liberty spoken by men like Jefferson and Patrick Henry were never meant for him, but Gabriel claimed them anyway. If all men are created equal, why should those words stop at the edge of his skin? The cabin where he slept was small and dark, but his imagination was vast. He thought of his brothers, his friends, the men who bent over fields under the Virginia Sunday. He saw their backs scarred, their spirits tested, and he thought, what if we rose together? In the forge's glow, he was no longer just a slave. He was a smith, shaping not just iron, but the outlines of rebellion. The late 18th century was an age of upheaval. Across the ocean, the French Revolution toppled kings and proclaimed liberty. In the Caribbean, Haiti burned with rebellion as Toussaint Louverture led enslaved men to victory, defeating the might of European empires. And in America, patriots had declared independence only decades earlier, promising freedom from tyranny. These currents of revolution reached even the fields of Virginia. Whispers traveled with sailors, with peddlers, with free black men who moved between cities. The enslaved heard stories of kings brought low and shackles broken. For many, it was dangerous talk. For Gabriel, it was fuel. He listened to the sermons of Baptist preachers who spoke of equality before God. He caught fragments of political speeches where white men railed against oppression. He remembered every phrase that rang with truth: freedom, rights, justice. These words were not meant for him, but they burned into his mind like iron fresh from the forge. Gabriel's faith in the possibility of liberation grew stronger with each passing year. The American Revolution had promised liberty but left men like him in chains. The Haitian Revolution had shown that enslaved people could rise up and win. He believed the same could happen in Virginia. Unlike scattered acts of defiance on plantations, Gabriel imagined something greater, a coordinated, organized strike at the very heart of the system. He spoke quietly to those he trusted: fellow laborers, field hands, skilled men who longed for freedom. They gathered in secrecy, their conversations hushed but charged with hope. In those moments, Gabriel's conviction took shape. Freedom was not a gift to be begged for. It was a right to be seized. He told his companions that God himself would bless their struggle, that the winds of history were shifting. He became not just a blacksmith, but a leader, a visionary. By the end of the 1,790 seconds, his belief had hardened into resolve. He no longer wondered if freedom would come, he wondered when, and more importantly, how. The question now was not whether Gabriel would act. It was how to forge a rebellion strong enough to break Virginia's chains. By 1800, Gabriel was no longer content with whispers in the dark. He began to weave his vision into a plan, bold, dangerous, and unlike anything Virginia had ever seen. The city of Richmond, the state capital, stood as both a symbol and a target. Its streets were lined with the homes of merchants, planters, and politicians. At its center loomed the seat of government, where Governor James Monroe, a man destined to become president, held power. To topple Richmond was to strike at the very heart of Virginia's slaveholding society. Gabriel's idea was audacious: gather thousands of enslaved men from plantations around the region, march into Richmond under the cover of night, and overwhelm the city before dawn. Their goal was not random chaos, but deliberate conquest. They would kill masters who resisted, seize weapons, and take Monroe himself hostage. With the governor in their grasp, Gabriel believed they could force negotiations, perhaps even the recognition of their freedom. This was no spontaneous riot. Gabriel approached it like a general preparing for battle. He spoke with men who commanded respect in their quarters, carefully selecting those he trusted. Word spread through coded phrases and subtle gestures. Meetings were held in fields, in cabins, in the dim glow of firelight, always with the knowledge that betrayal meant death. As the plan took shape, it carried both hope and dread. For those who joined, it was a chance to shatter generations of bondage. But it was also a leap into the unknown, for failure meant not just punishment, but annihilation. Still, Gabriel's conviction was contagious. He had a way of speaking that stirred hearts, of convincing men that destiny was on their side. He told them they were not alone. Haiti had risen, France had risen, America had risen. Now, it was Virginia's turn. The date was set, the 30th of August, 1800. On that night, hundreds, perhaps thousands, would converge on Richmond. The city would wake not to the clatter of morning carts, but to the sound of liberation forged in iron and fire. In the shadows, the conspiracy grew. Every man who joined carried the weight of history on his shoulders, and at the center stood Gabriel, the blacksmith turned commander, preparing to ignite a revolution. The forge became the beating heart of the rebellion. By day, Gabriel's hammer rang out in honest labor. He shaped plowshares, mended chains, and repaired wagon parts. To his masters, it was nothing unusual, just another day of toil. But when the sun went down, the anvil told a different story. In the dim hours of night, trusted men gathered at the blacksmith's shop. Sparks flew as iron met hammer, but these were not tools for farming. They were blades, knives, swords, and spears concealed within the smoke and shadows. The men worked in silence, each strike of the hammer a vow whispered to the fire: freedom or death. Weapons were hidden with cunning care. Some were buried beneath floorboards, others wrapped in cloth and stored in barns. A farmer might think he saw only hoes and sickles, but in truth, war waited just beneath the surface. The secrecy was absolute. Wives and children knew little, for their safety depended on silence. The fewer who spoke, the safer the dream remained. Yet within the small circles of men who dared to prepare, there was a sense of brotherhood, a quiet understanding that their lives were bound together now. For Gabriel, every night at the forge was a meditation. As steel glowed red, he imagined the moment those blades would be drawn in the streets of Richmond. He pictured the march, the clash, the breaking of chains. The fire's heat became the breath of revolution itself. The risk was immense. Any overseer who stumbled upon the workshop could end everything. Any man who faltered under fear could betray them all. Yet they pressed on, knowing that without weapons, their plan was only a dream. And so, as the summer of 1800 deepened, the quiet fields of Virginia held a secret no master could see. Beneath the calm of plantation life, iron was being transformed into the instruments of rebellion. When Gabriel looked at the glowing steel, he saw more than metal. He saw the shape of freedom, hammered into existence by hands that had once been bound. Gabriel knew rebellion could not survive on passion alone. It needed precision, order, and discipline. In the secrecy of night, he laid out a strategy that was startling in its detail, more like the blueprint of a military campaign than the whispers of desperate men. Richmond would be the target, but the city was not unguarded. To succeed, Gabriel planned for more than a march. He divided his followers into groups, each with specific tasks. Some would seize weapons, others would set fire to bridges, blocking reinforcements from crossing into the city. Roads would be cut off, patrols disrupted, escape routes sealed. Every move was calculated to buy time and disorient the enemy. Gabriel also insisted on discipline. This was not to be a blind riot of rage. His orders were clear. Women and children were to be spared, the elderly untouched. Their enemy was not every white person, but the masters, the men who held power, who profited from bondage, who stood in the way of freedom. It was a radical distinction, and it spoke to Gabriel's vision of a new order. At the center of the plan stood the boldest piece of all, the capture of Governor James Monroe. Gabriel believed that with the governor held hostage, Virginia's ruling class would be forced to bargain. The shock of such an act could shake the very foundation of slavery. The men who listened to him were struck not only by the daring of the plan, but by the calm certainty with which Gabriel described it. He carried himself like a commander, not a slave. When he spoke, men believed. Word spread carefully, one trusted voice at a time. In cabins, in barns, in the fields after sunset, men whispered of the 30th of August, 1800, the night when the chains would break. For Gabriel, every detail was a step closer to freedom, and as summer drew on, the date of destiny crept nearer, the 30th of August, 1800, the night that was to change Virginia forever. As darkness fell, groups of men slipped away from the plantations. They gathered in the fields, their faces lit by flashes of lightning in the distance. Some carried hidden blades forged in secrecy, others came with farm tools sharpened into weapons, hearts pounded with anticipation and fear. But nature itself seemed to rise against them. As the hour approached, the skies broke open. Rain poured down in torrents, drenching men to the bone. Thunder rolled, drowning out whispered orders. The very air turned to chaos. The plan depended on movement roads to Richmond, bridges to cross, signals to follow. But the storm turned those roads into rivers of mud. A key bridge collapsed under the floodwaters, cutting off entire groups from reaching the rendezvous point. The carefully woven plan unraveled in the downpour. Gabriel waited, scanning the horizon, hoping the men would still come. But the numbers were smaller than expected, the delays longer, the confusion greater. Time was slipping away. What was meant to be a coordinated strike now threatened to dissolve into scattered fragments. Some urged him to press forward anyway. Others warned that marching half-prepared would mean certain destruction. Gabriel's decision was torn between courage and caution. Before he could act, the storm had already betrayed them in another way. Dawn approached. The night that was to be their shield had become their undoing. Wet, disorganized, and unable to move as planned, the rebellion faltered. And worse, rumors of their gathering had begun to spread. The uprising that might have shaken Virginia to its core was stopped not by muskets or bayonets, but by the fury of the skies. Still, Gabriel knew this was only the beginning. If not this night, then another. Freedom could be delayed, but not denied. Yet he could not have foreseen how quickly betrayal would follow the storm. The storm had broken more than bridges. It had broken resolve. In the confusion of that night, some men wavered. The plan that had seemed unstoppable now felt fragile. And when fear crept in, betrayal was never far behind. Two enslaved men, caught between loyalty and survival, made the choice that would doom the rebellion. They slipped away from the gathering fields and hurried to their masters. Breathless, dripping with rain, they delivered the news. Gabriel Prosser was planning an uprising, and the night of fire was upon them. Panic spread through Richmond's white population like wildfire. The alarm was sounded, militias were mobilized. Governor James Monroe was alerted at once, and within hours, patrols of armed men were scouring the countryside. The betrayal tore through Gabriel's ranks before a single blade was raised. Men who had dreamed of freedom now scattered into the woods, terrified of being caught in the dragnet. Cabins were raided, barns searched, fields combed for signs of rebels. What had been a movement of thousands dissolved almost overnight into hunted fragments. Those who were captured faced brutal interrogations. Some confessed, others gave names, hoping to save themselves. A rebellion that had once carried the breath of revolution now suffocated under the weight of fear and exposure. Gabriel himself vanished into the shadows. He knew the plan was compromised, but he refused to surrender. For weeks, he stayed one step ahead of the patrols, relying on allies who offered food and shelter. His name spread in whispers, both feared and admired. To the authorities, he was a fugitive. To many of the enslaved, he was already a legend. But betrayal had a way of repeating itself, and soon, even Gabriel's careful silence would not be enough. Gabriel's disappearance gnawed at the authorities. They had crushed the uprising before it began, but as long as he remained free, he was a living threat. He was the blacksmith who had forged not only weapons, but hope, and hope was harder to kill than any man. Patrols combed the countryside, interrogating and terrorizing those suspected of aiding him. Rewards were offered, promises of clemency were whispered to any who would give him up. The net grew tighter with every passing day. For a time, Gabriel seemed untouchable. He hid in barns, in cabins, in the woods beyond the plantations. He moved under the cover of night, a shadow slipping through the Virginia fields. But every man has limits, and every fugitive leaves a trail. At last, one of the very people he trusted betrayed him. For fear, for money, or for the desperate hope of sparing themselves, they revealed his hiding place. Soldiers surrounded the spot. There was no battle, no last stand. When Gabriel was taken, it was in silence, as though fate itself had closed its hand around him. He was brought in chains to Richmond. The irony was sharp. He who had dreamed of storming the city now entered it as a prisoner. Crowds gathered to glimpse the man whose name had filled the air with dread. Some spat insults, others stared in awe. He was no longer just a slave. He was the face of a conspiracy that had shaken Virginia to its core. Before the court, Gabriel did not beg. He did not confess in desperation. He stood tall, silent, and unbroken. To his captors, that silence was defiance. To his followers, it was dignity. The rebellion had failed. The plan had been betrayed. But Gabriel himself had not bowed. In chains, he carried the same unyielding spirit that had led him to dream of freedom in the first place. The 10th of October, 1800. The day Gabriel Prosser met his fate. The city of Richmond stirred with unease. Rumors had swirled for weeks about the trial, the betrayals, the men sentenced to die. Now, the blacksmith who had dared to dream of freedom stood at the gallows, shackled but unbowed. The authorities intended the execution to be more than punishment. It was theater. It was a warning. White residents packed the square, eyes fixed on the man who had nearly brought fire to their city. For the enslaved forced to attend, it was meant to be terror made flesh. But Gabriel refused to play his role as victim. When asked for a final statement, he said nothing. No pleas, no apologies, no broken words, only silence. He lifted his head high, his expression calm, his eyes defiant. That silence cut deeper than any speech. It was the silence of a man who had already chosen his destiny. One by one, his fellow conspirators were led out and hanged alongside him. Dozens of men who had believed in the cause shared his fate. The air was thick with the creak of rope, the murmurs of the crowd, the unspoken knowledge that an idea had almost become reality. Governor James Monroe and the ruling elite of Virginia breathed easier that day. They believed the rebellion had been stamped out, its leader destroyed, its lesson delivered. Yet, even in death, Gabriel's presence was unsettling. He had shown what so many feared, that the enslaved were not passive, that they listened, learned, dreamed, and planned. For those who watched with hope in their hearts, his silence spoke volumes. It said, "I do not regret, I do not bow, I die free in spirit, if not in body." The ropes silenced Gabriel Prosser, but they could not silence what he represented. His body swung in Richmond's air, but his defiance lingered in the minds of those who had seen him stand tall until the very end. Gabriel never lived to see freedom. His rebellion never reached Richmond's streets. The storm and betrayal crushed it before the first blow was struck. But his dream did not vanish. In whispered stories, in secret songs, in the silent resolve of those still in chains, Gabriel's name lived on. He proved that slavery could not erase dignity, nor smother the will to resist. And though his fire never ignited, its embers glowed in the memory of generations. If Gabriel Prosser's story moved you, subscribe to Murder Files TV, because some flames, though doused, still burn in history's shadows.